Jade, he would do what he had sworn never to do. He would slay the leopard. As the sun rose, Olumide slung his bow over his shoulder and headed toward the forest. But his feet felt heavy, his heart torn. By mid-morning, he stopped by a palm wine tapper's stand, seeking courage in the sweet, fermented drink. He ordered a calabash of the brew and sat beneath the shade of a palm tree, lost in thoughts. A few minutes later, a ragged old man approached the stand. His clothes were filthy, little more than tattered rags clinging to his thin frame. His face was weathered, and his hair was unkempt, but his eyes carried a quiet dignity. "Do you have any to spare, young man?" the old man asked, gesturing toward Olumide's drink. "I haven't had palm wine in years." Olumide nodded, calling for another calabash. "Drink your fill, elder. It's on me." The man smiled, his teeth yellowed, but his expression warm. "May your kindness return to you tenfold." They sat together, talking as they drank. The old man revealed he lived deep in the forest and had noticed the recent influx of hunters. "They're after that leopard," Olumide admitted. "The king is offering a great prize to anyone who can kill it." The old man's face darkened. "That creature is no ordinary animal. It's the spirit of the forest. Those who seek its death will find themselves lost." Olumide fell silent, his thoughts swirling. After a moment, he asked, "Where are you headed, elder?" "To a wedding," the man said, his tone brightening. "A distant village, far from here." Olumide frowned. The old man's ragged clothes and unkempt appearance seemed at odds with the joyous occasion. The man noticed his glance and laughed softly. "These are the best I have. They may not look like much, but they've carried me through many seasons." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two young men. Olumide recognized them immediately. Akin and Tay, the spoiled twin sons of a wealthy chief. They were brash, arrogant, and known for their cruelty. Both were dressed in fine hunting clothes and carried expensive bows. The twins ordered drinks, their loud laughter disrupting the peace of the palm wine stand. It didn't take long for them to notice the old man. Akin wrinkled his nose. "What's that smell?" "It's coming from him," Tay sneered, pointing at the old man. "Ugh, disgusting!" Olumide stiffened but held his tongue, hoping they would leave. But the twins, emboldened by the palm wine, grew bolder. "Are you heading to a dung heap, old man?" Akin jeered. "Because that's the only place you'd fit in." "I am going to a wedding." Tay laughed cruelly, grabbing at the old man's ragged shawl. "Let's help him dress for the part." Before Olumide could intervene, Tay yanked at the old man's clothing, tearing it apart. The twins erupted into laughter, tossing the shredded rags on the ground. "Enjoy your wedding, elder," they mocked, staggering off into the forest. The old man sat quietly, his hands trembling as he gathered the remnants of his clothes. Tears streamed down his face. "I can't go now," he murmured. "Not like this." Olumide's heart ached at the sight. Without hesitation, he removed his own garment, a simple but clean and well-made tunic, and handed it to the old man. "Here, elder, take mine." The old man's eyes widened. "But you'll have nothing to wear." "I'll be fine," Olumide said firmly. "Your dignity is worth more than my pride." The old man hesitated, then accepted the tunic, his hands shaking. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you can't go about bare-chested. Here, take this." He held out his tattered shawl, insisting Olumide wear it until they could exchange garments again. Olumide wanted to refuse, the thought of wearing the filthy rags filling him with discomfort. But he saw the sincerity in the old man's eyes and couldn't bring himself to hurt his feelings. Reluctantly, he draped the shawl over his shoulders. I guess it's better than nothing, Olumide thought. I'll hurry home and change. He forced a smile as he noticed the elder smiling at him, pleased. When Olumide returned home, his mother Adiola took one look at him and gasped, Olumide, what on earth are you wearing? He glanced down at the tattered shawl draped over his shoulders, suddenly self-conscious. It's a long story, Mama. Adiola crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. Then sit down and tell it. Sighing, Olumide recounted the events at the palm wine stand, the old man, the twins' cruelty, and his decision to give away his garment. When he finished, Adiola shook her head, half exasperated, half proud. You have your father's heart, she said softly, always helping those in need. Olumide shrugged, pulling off the shawl. It's filthy though. I can't wear it. Adiola took the shawl gingerly between her fingers, inspecting the worn fabric. It's more than filthy. It's falling apart. I was tempted to throw it away, Olumide admitted, but he said it was the best he had. He sighed, folding it neatly. It doesn't feel right to discard it. I'll keep it for now. Adiola nodded approvingly. You did the right thing, my son. But now, tell me, are you joining the hunt tomorrow? Olumide shook his head. No, Mama, I've decided not to. The leopard isn't just an animal, it's something more. Besides, he hesitated, his voice softening. I'll speak to Jade soon. If she feels the same, we'll leave this place together. Adiola's expression was unreadable, but her eyes shone with pride. Follow your heart, Olumide, but tread carefully. The world isn't always kind to love. The next morning, Olumide woke to a commotion outside. The sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps drew him to the village square, where a large crowd had gathered. What's happening? He asked a neighbor. It's Tay and Akin, the man replied grimly. They went into the forest last night to hunt the leopard. Akin came back, but Tay didn't. Olumide's heart sank. The twins were rude and spoiled, but the thought of one of them lost, or worse, filled him with unease. What about Akin? Did he say what happened? The man gestured toward the center of the square, where Akin sat slumped on the ground, his face gray and drawn. His fine hunting clothes were torn and smeared with dirt, and his eyes were wide with fear. I don't know, Akin was saying to the gathered elders, his voice trembling. We followed it. We thought we had it cornered, but then he trailed off, shaking his head. I don't know what happened. I turned around and Tay was gone. The village elders exchanged worried glances. One of them, an older woman named Iya Fadeki, stepped forward. We must find him. Gather the hunters. We'll form a search party. A vigilante squad was quickly assembled, and the search began. All day, the villagers scoured the forest, calling Tay's name and searching for any sign of him. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, they returned empty-handed. In the square, the crowd fell into a somber silence as the reality of Tay's disappearance settled over them. Akin sat apart from the others, his head in his hands, silent tears streaming down his face. That night, the village was uncharacteristically quiet. The usually lively evening chatter was replaced by whispers and prayers for Tay's safe return. Olumide sat outside his hut, staring up at the stars. He couldn't shake the old man's words from his mind. Those who seek its death will find themselves lost. Was Tay's disappearance a punishment for his arrogance, or was it simply the danger of hunting a creature that was never meant to be caught? Olumide didn't know, but the weight of the day's events pressed heavily on him. In the distance, He could see the lights of the palace flickering through the trees. He thought of Jade, wondering if she had heard the news. Was she as shaken as he was? Did she still hope for the leopard's capture? Or had the tragedy changed her mind? He leaned back against the wall of his hut, clutching the tattered shawl he had folded earlier. Its rough fabric seemed to hum faintly beneath his fingers, as though carrying a secret of its own. As the village mourned and speculated over Tay's fate, Olumide couldn't shake a growing sense of responsibility. He knew the forest better than anyone, its hidden trails, its secret clearings, and its moods. If anyone could find Tay, it was him. The twins had been cruel, but no one deserved to vanish without a trace. The next morning, Olumide gathered his things, his bow, a small pouch of provisions, and a lantern, and set out into the forest. The forest was eerily quiet as Olumide moved through its depths. His eyes scanned the ground for footprints, broken branches, or any sign of a struggle. He called out Tay's name, but only his own voice echoed back to him. As the hours passed, his frustration grew. The sun began to sink behind the trees, casting long golden shadows. Finally, as darkness closed in, Olumide decided to head back. He felt a pang of guilt for not finding Tay, but resolved to resume the search at first light. Just as he turned to leave, a chill ran down his spine. He froze, feeling a presence nearby. Slowly he turned, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing less than 10 paces away was the rainbow leopard. It was massive, larger than he'd ever imagined, its luminous, multicolored spots shimmering in the dim light. Its eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to pierce straight through him. The creature was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a vision of raw power and grace. Olumide's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. He was certain this was the end. The leopard would strike, and he would vanish, just like Tay. But then, something impossible happened. The leopard's form began to shimmer, its edges blurring and dissolving into light. Before Olumide's eyes, it transformed, its massive body shrinking and reshaping, until, standing in its place, was the old man from the palm wine stand. Olumide's jaw dropped. The old man smiled, his expression calm and knowing. "Don't be afraid, young hunter." "You," Olumide stammered, his heart racing. "You're the leopard?" The old man nodded. "I am. I have been for a very long time." The old man, or spirit, sat on a nearby rock, gesturing for Olumide to do the same. "Sometimes I take human form to experience life as you do. It's amusing in its way, but it also reminds me how cruel people can be." Olumide's mind raced. "Then, Tay, did you—" The old man scoffed. "Kill him. No, I'm no murderer, boy, but I don't take kindly to arrogance and oppression." His face darkened briefly. "Those twins, spoiled, selfish brats. They mocked me as a man, and then they had the audacity to hunt me as a leopard. A lesson was in order." "What kind of lesson?" Olumide asked, his voice cautious. "I showed Tay what it feels like to be hunted, to be powerless," the old man said. "He's alive, unharmed, but perhaps a bit shaken. He's in my home, a cave in the hills, far from here." Olumide exhaled, relief washing over him. "Will you take me to him? The village is worried sick." The old man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Follow me." The journey to the cave was long and winding, the old man leading Olumide through dense thickets and up steep hills. They traveled in silence, the forest growing darker with every step. Finally, they reached the entrance of a cave. Hidden behind, a curtain of vines. The old man waved a hand, and the vines parted, revealing a dimly lit interior. When Olumide and the old man entered the cave, Olumide couldn't help but notice the odd collection of tattered rags hanging along a rocky ledge. They were filthy, torn, and seemed entirely out of place in the otherwise mystical aura of the cave. The old man caught him staring and chuckled. "Ah, you've noticed my collection. These are my human clothes." Olumide's brow furrowed. "All of them?" "Of course," the old man replied, walking over to the ledge. He picked up one particular piece and held it up. "This one is special. It's the one you lent me." He grinned, shaking the fabric lightly. "I must say, it was the finest thing I've worn in quite some time." Olumide smiled faintly, but couldn't shake his confusion. "Why do you keep them? Why not buy better ones?" The old man's expression grew mischievous. "Because these rags are what everyone fights for." He grabbed one of the rags and put it on, then began to change before Olumide's eyes. His form shimmered, and in seconds he had transformed into the magnificent rainbow leopard, its luminous multicolored spots glowing faintly in the dim light of the cave. Olumide's breath caught. "You mean—" The leopard shifted back into the old man, who was now laughing heartily. "Yes, young hunter, the beautiful skin your king desires so badly. It is my spirit's gift. It clings to me when I take this form, and when I shed it, well," he gestured to the rags, "this is what's left behind." The old man's laughter subsided, and he motioned for Olumide to follow him deeper into the cave. They turned a corner, and there, sitting against the wall, was Tay. He was pale and shaken, but otherwise unharmed. "Tay," Olumide called softly. Tay's head snapped up, and his eyes filled with relief. "Olumide, please get me out of here." The old man raised an eyebrow. "I told you he's fine, but let this be a lesson to him. Perhaps next time he'll think twice before hunting something he doesn't understand." Tay stood quickly, but his gaze avoided the old man entirely. "I just want to go home." The old man chuckled, turning back to Olumide. "Now, young hunter, before you leave, I must ask you something." His eyes twinkled knowingly. "The shawl I gave you, did you throw it away?" Olumide shook his head. "No, I kept it. I wasn't sure why, but I felt it wasn't right to discard it." The old man smiled broadly. "Good. I think you'll find a little surprise waiting for you when you return home." Olumide frowned, puzzled by the cryptic statements, but the old man waved him off, signaling that the conversation was over. "Now, take this boy back to his people. I'm sure they're worried sick." When Olumide and Taye emerged from the forest, the village erupted in cheers. People gathered around, praising Olumide for his bravery and skill. Even Akin, who had been inconsolable since his brother's disappearance, clung to Olumide, thanking him over and over. Despite the celebration, Olumide's thoughts lingered on the old man's words. As soon as he could excuse himself, he slipped away from the crowd and headed home. In his hut, Olumide went straight to the folded shawl he had stored the day before. As he unwrapped it, he gasped. The tattered, filthy rag was gone. In its place was the most exquisite leopard skin he had ever seen. Its luminous, multicolored spots shimmered like a living rainbow, and its softness was unlike anything he had ever felt. His mother entered the room and froze, her eyes wide. "Olumide, where did you get that?" "It was the shawl," he whispered, still staring in awe. "The one the old man gave me." Adiola crossed herself and muttered a prayer. But Olumide couldn't help but smile. He now understood what the old man had meant. The journey to the palace felt both endless and fleeting for Olumide. The leopard skin, safely tucked in a leather bag slung over his shoulder, seemed to hum with quiet power. His heart pounded as he approached the gates and requested an audience with the king. When he was escorted into the throne room, the atmosphere was electric. King Adidotun sat on his gilded throne, flanked by Queen Yinka and Jade. Courtiers and nobles murmured among themselves as Olumide approached, bowing respectfully. "What brings you here, young hunter?" the king asked, his voice regal but curious. Olumide straightened, his eyes meeting the king's. "Your Majesty, I have brought you the prize you have long desired." He reached into the bag and slowly pulled out the leopard skin. Gasps filled the room as the multicolored, luminous spots shimmered under the light of the grand hall. The king's eyes widened, his expression one of awe and disbelief. "It's magnificent," King Adidotun breathed, stepping forward to examine the skin. He ran his fingers over its soft surface, marveling at its beauty. "How did you manage this?" Olumide chose his words carefully. "The forest blessed me, Your Majesty. It was no easy feat, but I brought it here for you." The king turned to him, his expression still one of amazement. "You've done what no one else could. Name your reward, young man. Anything you desire, and it shall be yours." Olumide took a deep breath, his voice steady but firm. "I wish to marry your daughter, Princess Jade." The court erupted in whispers, and Jade bowed her head, hiding a smile. Queen Yinka also hid a small smile, watching the scene unfold. The king's expression shifted, surprise and contemplation warring on his face. He glanced at Jade, who couldn't hide the hopeful glimmer in her eyes. Then he looked back at Olumide, measuring him carefully. "You are not of noble blood," the king said after a long pause, "and yet you have accomplished what no noble could. You've proven your courage, your resourcefulness, and your devotion. If Jade agrees," he turned to his daughter, "what do you say?" Jade stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "I agree, father. I choose Olumide." King Adidotun nodded, a small smile breaking through his stoic demeanor. "Then so be it. The wedding shall take place." The palace was abuzz with preparations for the grand celebration. The news of Olumide's victory and his upcoming marriage to Princess Jade spread quickly, drawing guests from far and wide. Chiefs, nobles, and villagers alike gathered to witness the union. On the day of the ceremony, the throne room was transformed into a dazzling spectacle of gold and silk. Jade was radiant in her wedding attire, and Olumide, dressed in fine robes provided by the queen, stood tall and proud by her side. Among the richly dressed guests, one figure stood out, a ragged old man, seated in a place of honor near the front. His tattered clothes and unkempt appearance drew puzzled looks and whispers from the crowd.